Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. I want to start this morning by saying a huge thank you to Anne and to all the candidates and all the members up in Leeds, where I spent a fantastic evening on Tuesday. So inspiring. The passion, the determination is truly inspiring. So thank you to everyone up in Leeds for a great evening. I have posted the full speech where I went through the 10-point plan, that is on our leaflets for these elections. And I went through them in great detail with the members and the candidates in Leeds. And I have posted that this morning on my Twitter account. Something I want to do this morning, and it'll probably take me a bit longer than usual, but I'll try not to drag it on for too long. But I've wanted to do this for a while, is to talk a little bit more about the media. And it was quite a few weeks ago now, there was an article published about me in a Milton Keynes newspaper. And it was perhaps the worst representation of an interview that I've seen yet. And only when you're on the receiving end of the media do you truly know what they get away with and the dishonesty they engage in. So I wanted to go through a couple of parts of this article, which I will post in the comments below. And I'll tell you what it says, what the article says, and what I actually said. And this will demonstrate to you not only the dishonesty, but how they get away with portraying people so dishonestly. So let me go to the article. And I will start with the headline, which is the best place to start. And the headline, now, I'll just to set the scene. This was myself, the journalist whose name is Ben Raza, and he's writing for the Milton Keynes Citizen. To set the scene, it was myself, Ben Raza, and Jeff Wyatt, who is the chairman of For Britain in Milton Keynes. Lunchtime, hotel in Milton Keynes, almost 2 hours we spoke for. We sat down and had a conversation. Journalists are always very, very nice, very pleasant, very professional. And then as soon as you turn your back, then they go away and write things like this. So almost 2 hours we were talking. And of that 2 hour long conversation, the headline he chose was this: "We didn't import Catholicism from abroad. We meet Anne-Marie Waters, leader of For Britain." So of all of that 2 hours, he chose, "We didn't import Catholicism from abroad." Now, let me explain what I actually said. I had referred to cultural practices which are illegal in Britain, knowingly being imported to Britain from countries where they're not illegal. And one example I gave was child marriage, and which is, of course, child rape. And as is so often the case, what he immediately did was say, what about Catholic priests raping children? To which I replied, well, we didn't import that from abroad. He gave me, I was about to explain further when he gave me well, yes, we did actually kind of look. And I said, okay, but only if you were alive 2,000 years ago, because Christianity came from the Middle East, yes, 2,000 years ago into Europe. None of us were alive then. We are talking about 2018. What happened 2,000 years ago is not actually relevant. We're not campaigning on what happened 2,000 years ago. We're campaigning on the Britain we live in today. And for those of us who are native to Europe, and our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents are native to Europe, we knew a Christian society. That's all we've known. So to us, Islam is new. And I gave examples of this when I was growing up, I never saw a burqa. I didn't know what a burqa was. But now, if you go through some streets in England, in London or in the north of England, you'll see great numbers of them. I didn't know what FGM was until I was in my 20s. These things are new to us. We have imported them from abroad. Statement of fact. I also pointed out that if we take Ireland for an example, which is where the Catholic child abuse scandal was most pronounced, it was allowed to go on for years because the church was so dominant, but it was simultaneously actually a criminal offence. What they were doing was criminal. And when eventually the dam broke and the truth couldn't be concealed any longer, several priests were convicted of offences and sent to prison. So compare that to Pakistan, where, for example, last year, a campaign to criminalise child marriage, i.e. child rape, was dismissed by the legislature as being un-Islamic. So compare the two. They are not comparable or in any way recognisable to each other. I also pointed out that the Catholic priest who was sexually abusing a child was doing so in contradiction or in disobedience to Christian scripture. There's nothing in Christian scripture that says it's okay for a priest to sexually abuse a child. It is, however, in Islamic scripture set in the Hadith by the example of Muhammad, child marriage is scripturally sanctioned, and those two vast differences exist between the two religions, between Christianity and between Islam. Now, that's what I said. What he wrote was, we didn't import Catholicism from abroad. This is how they do it. This is how they do it. It is absolutely obscenely dishonest. I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't. I could never be this dishonest. So we go down to the sub headline. An elected NHS. Not quite what I said. Police bosses going to prison if they do not prosecute certain criminals. Well, I'll expand on that. And this one is particularly dishonest. And an Irish policy that could force soldiers back onto the streets of Belfast. Now, what he's saying there clearly is that for Britain has an Irish policy that could force soldiers back on to the streets of Belfast, implying that we don't care about such an issue. If there's soldiers on the streets of Belfast, well, who cares? The absolute opposite of what I actually said. Let me start with an elected NHS. I did not say we had a policy for an elected NHS. I discussed that it was floated by you, an elected NHS, in other words, boards to oversee the NHS, which are elected, which was a UKIP policy a couple of years back. It's an option. It's something to discuss. I explained to him that our overriding principle was that there is accountability from the higher echelons of the NHS to the public, and how best to work that is still up to debate. But the principle, the aim, is an accountable NHS. One possibility is elected boards to oversee this, although I did say also at the time that what this does is bring politics in. And what you have then is people who care only about getting elected, or if they don't start off that way, they may become that way, where their focus is on getting re-elected rather than working in the best interests of the local community. So when you bring elections into things, you do bring that element of politics into things. I discussed all of this with him at length. He reported it as an elected NHS. The Irish policy that could force soldiers back onto the streets of Belfast. Now, he goes on to say that I had said, and I did, and again, this is how they get away with it. But in the midst of a long discussion, he reported me as saying, "I'd rather not have a border with Ireland, but if Ireland continues to have so much immigration, then there will have to be a hard border." What I was discussing there and what I went into in detail with him was that the reason I'd rather not have a hard border is because we don't want to see perhaps checkpoints in Northern Ireland again. I would rather not see that, and I made that clear. It could. He goes on to say that he quotes me as saying the people in Northern Ireland will have to deal with that. Well, let me explain that first of all. It is up to the people of Northern Ireland. This is one of the most difficult elements of Brexit, purely because it could ignite trouble in Northern Ireland again, and that is exactly what we want to avoid. So when I said the people in Northern Ireland will have to deal with that, as he quoted me, what I actually said, what I would continued saying, is that the parties in Northern Ireland will all need to be included in this. All interested parties need to sit down and come up with a policy or a way of dealing with the Northern Ireland issue that will not lead us back to Troubles. He goes on to quote me as saying it could reignite the demand for a united Ireland. Well, it already has. I'm simply stating facts. I'm simply stating the realities about the difficulties that the Northern Irish element of Brexit represents. And we know this is already happening because Sinn Féin are already talking about a referendum on a united Ireland. All I'm doing is pointing out the difficulties, but it's very much portrayed, or at least I think it's portrayed, as if I couldn't care less. If there's troubles again in Northern Ireland, well, who cares? It's Ireland's fault. It's Ireland's fault. He quotes me as saying that. What I said there was that Ireland is not going to like having a border with Britain. There's never been a border between Britain and Ireland. But the people in this country voted for controlled borders. And if you have an open border with a country inside the EU, you haven't strictly got what the people voted for. There is still, technically speaking, a route through Southern Ireland into the UK that is uncontrolled. And if Ireland insists on mass immigration, which it appears it does, then it has only itself to blame if it has a border with the UK. And I stand by that. Okay, let me move on. Closer to home, Ms. Waters said she wants a review of bureaucracy across the NHS, although she was not clear which organisations would or would not be included in the review. It's absolutely unbelievable. What I said was that it is not for politicians who don't know the in and out daily workings of certain bodies to stick their oar in and demand that this or that is done. Experts advise politicians on these issues, experts who know the ins and outs and the daily running of things. That is how politics works. Politicians don't know everything about everything. Some of them pretend to, but they don't. What happens is experts in that area advise, the politician states an aim. This is our aim. Our aim is to reduce waste in the NHS. How we go about it is advised to politicians by experts in that field. I explained to him that politicians do not know the inner and outer workings of these things, and nor can they. It's impossible to know everything. What they do is state an aim and then get advice from experts on how best to achieve that aim. That is how it works. Now, I know a lot of politicians pretend that they know everything. And one fantastic example comes to mind was the Diane Abbott interview. And I'll post this as well, actually. It's really, really good. She was being interviewed about a certain report. Clearly, she had no idea what this report said, but continued to pretend that she did. Now, I would much rather, and I think trust is going to be far higher between a politician who says, I'm not 100% on how that works, or even to admit, in the case of Diane Abbott, I haven't read that report. How refreshing would it be if a politician admitted they don't know everything? And that is simply what I said to him. It is up to experts on these, particular the financial arm of the NHS, for example, to report on exactly how it works, exactly how the money is being spent, and then the politician makes a decision on which way to go forward to achieve the aim. That's how it works. That is what I actually said. He reports it as, although she was not clear which organisations would or not be included in the review. It's unbelievable. Let's go down a little bit here. Their manifesto calls for police commanders to be accountable for any failure to enforce the law. Yes, it does. Completely stand by that. It's up for, he says, it's up for debate. Yes, it is. As I've repeatedly said, our party will have major policy areas that our members will vote on. So not every policy has yet been decided by our members. And it's not usual for political parties to present a detailed manifesto at this point. Most parties present it just before an election. And we will do the same. And we are still working on our detailed manifesto, but this is put to the public as if we simply don't know what we're talking about. We're presented as incompetent, and very, very deliberately. So he goes on to say, much of the press coverage surrounding Anne-Marie Waters has centred upon her view on Islam, but she says she has no problem with individual Muslims, only the religion. He asked me whether I have any friends that are Muslims. And what I actually said was, I would be very happy to, but unfortunately, where I am, where what I do, most Muslims would probably completely distrust me, partly because of how I'm presented. But he reported it as I don't really mix in circles when Muslims will be around. It's absolutely extraordinary. Um, let me go down through a little bit more. British citizenship. Of course, he points out that my partner is a naturalized British citizen. He quotes me as saying, it was 7 years when my partner became, 7 years of having to live here, when my partner became a British citizen. It should be longer and more exclusive. It seems to me it's given out far too easily. Once again, we talked at some length about this. I talked at some length about the need to know who people are, the need to know that they are productive citizens, working, paying taxes, obeying the law, and that they don't necessarily harbor ideas about overthrowing British democracy and replacing it with theocracy. I went into some detail about how it represents a threat to us to allow people who openly speak out against our democratic values to come here en masse and become citizens. And I simply said that it would probably take a longer time than 7 years, and indeed more knowledge of people before they can apply for and receive British citizenship. But these are just some examples. As I said, I don't want to go on for too long because people don't like it when I make these videos too long. But just the headline is staggering to me. It's absolutely staggering to me because I was there and I know what was said, and it is incredible to read back this. I don't quite know what to call it. It astounds me how anyone can be this dishonest, and the impact that this has is profoundly, profoundly important, and that's what makes this dishonesty so profoundly immoral. The British people are being misled, lied to on really, really important issues, such as the future and the shape of their country and their democracy. They're being lied to constantly and consistently. And therefore, the end result of this is that people are not voting in their best interest. They are voting based on lies. They are voting based on smears and misrepresentations. And therefore, they are, and this is the inevitable result, voting, in fact, against their best interest. The media must be exposed on this at every opportunity. It is so profoundly immoral to me, and the impact of it can be felt everywhere, all the time, all over this country. People frightened to express their views, politicians afraid to say what they really think about things, and the impact is that we end up with more and more crime, more and more corruption, and more useless politicians who are going to do absolutely nothing about it. Okay, what time are we on? Oh, 20 minutes, okay. Right, I'm up in Yorkshire again tomorrow, having meeting a couple of people for some advice on how to take the party forward. As I said last week, I do this regularly. But I'll be back on Monday, back here at 11 o'clock on Monday, and I think it's time for a bit of a review of what's going on with Brexit. Okay, have a good weekend until then, and I'll see you back here at 11 o'clock on Monday. Take care.